The car door shuts with a low thud, and suddenly the world goes quiet. Engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. But the heart keeps pounding as if the danger were still in front of the car. This arrival happens every morning. Yet, the heaviness inside the chest has been getting worse for months. Last night, a small question about household chores turned into a sharp argument that ended with a slammed door and a sleepless tangle of sheets. Why does a body designed to protect you start to break down when the alarm never stops ringing? But vacations have been tried, and the relief evaporates within the first 2 days back at the desk. So the tension keeps building like water rising behind a dam that has no spillway. To see what is actually happening, you have to look past the visible situation and into the hidden biology that evolved for a world that no longer exists. Inside the body, a survival circuit that saves lives during a sudden threat has been switched on, and it was never built to run without an off switch. That circuit is called the stress response, and in short bursts it sharpens attention, speeds the heart, and delivers energy exactly where a body needs it. The first turn comes when you realize the problem is not the stress itself, but the fact that the response has not stopped moving. Imagine a smoke alarm that shrieks for 30 seconds to warn of a kitchen fire, then falls silent after the danger passes. Now imagine the same alarm ringing continuously for weeks, month after month, until nobody can sleep, nobody can think clearly, and the sound itself starts to damage the walls. That continuous ringing is what chronic stress does inside a human body and brain. In an acute emergency, those signals raise blood pressure, send glucose to muscles, and temporarily put digestion, reproduction, and immune responses on hold. All of this makes perfect sense when you are running from a physical threat that will be over in minutes. The brain cannot always tell the difference, especially when the demands never stop. The outcomes feel uncertain, and the sense of control keeps shrinking. So the same chemical cascade meant for brief emergencies stays activated, and the body begins to wear down under what scientists call allostatic load. Allostatic load is the cumulative price the body pays when it must adjust repeatedly to chronic stressors without enough recovery. Think of it as the mechanical strain on an engine that is never allowed to cool, or the fraying of a rope that is pulled tight day and night. You can see early of this load in our person, whose sleep keeps fracturing into shallow fragments that never restore the mind. Sleep is supposed to flush out metabolic waste and consolidate memory, but cortisol at night keeps the brain in a state of low-grade alertness that blocks that essential cleaning. Soon, the same person who used to manage complex projects with ease finds themselves rereading emails twice, losing their keys, and snapping at people they care about. The obvious explanation was that they just needed to try harder to relax. But the mechanism underneath reveals that the brain itself is being reshaped by the unrelenting signal. Researchers have found that chronic exposure to high cortisol is associated with disruptions in 2 brain areas that matter deeply for daily life. One is the hippocampus, a structure crucial for forming and retrieving memories, and the other is the prefrontal cortex, which helps us plan, regulate emotion, and make deliberate choices. At the same time, the amygdala, an almond-shaped collection of neurons that responds to threat, becomes more reactive under chronic stress, making the alarm louder even when the danger is small. Now, our person is caught in a feedback loop. A stressful environment activates the alarm. The alarm disrupts sleep. Poor sleep weakens emotional control, and emotional outbursts create more conflict at home and at work. This is not a character flaw or a personal failure. It is an adaptive system trapped in an environment it was not designed to handle. To understand why the system gets trapped, you have to follow the body's chief stress hormone, cortisol, through a typical day. Under chronic stress, that natural curve flattens, and instead of an energetic morning, you wake up already exhausted, with the feeling that you have not rested at all. The person in the car each morning is living with a flattened cortisol rhythm, facing a full day before the biological gas tank has ever been refilled. Laboratory evidence also shows that chronic stress can dampen the immune response, slowing wound healing and leaving a person more vulnerable to infections that a well-rested body could fight off more easily. Our person notices they catch every cold that passes through the office, and a small paper cut takes noticeably longer to heal than it did a few years ago. Over months and years, the sustained strain can contribute to higher blood pressure, changes in how the body handles blood sugar, and the accumulation of abdominal fat. These are not isolated symptoms. They are chapter headings in the same story of a body that keeps preparing for a physical battle that never arrives and never ends. But here, a crucial complication enters the picture. Not everyone under identical pressure develops the same cost. What makes the difference is often not the stressor itself, but the degree of control, predictability, and human support that surrounds it. Classic workplace studies have repeatedly found that it is the combination of high demand and low control that most strongly predicts stress-related illness. When people feel they have little say over how tasks are done, when the rules seem arbitrary, and when appreciation is scarce, the stress system stays activated far longer than would happen with sheer hard work alone. Similarly, social isolation acts as a magnifier, while a single trusted colleague or a supportive family member can blunt the biological impact considerably. Our person used to have a close team at work, but after 2 rounds of layoffs and a shift to remote coordination, the hallway conversations have vanished, and the screen has replaced every face. That loss of connection is not just emotionally painful. It removes one of the strongest signals that tells the brain the environment is still safe enough to lower the alarm. Another factor that deepens the trap is the way chronic stress reshapes attention and judgment. When the stress system is overactive, the brain devotes more processing power to detecting negative information and potential threats, while filtering out signals of safety or opportunity. So, a brief frown from a manager becomes evidence of imminent failure, and a delayed reply from a friend reads like a deliberate withdrawal. Our person finds themselves replaying small moments of criticism long after the words were spoken, unable to let them go even when the objective record shows plenty of successes. This biased attention does not mean they are pessimists by nature. It means the stress response has temporarily narrowed the window through which they see the world, and decisions made through that narrow window tend to be more rigid, less creative, and more avoidant, which can push away the very support and problem-solving that would reduce the stress. A further layer of the mechanism is how chronic stress can influence behavior through what some scientists call the effort-reward imbalance. When prolonged effort is not followed by meaningful relief, recognition, or rest, the brain's motivational systems can downregulate, making once enjoyable activities feel hollow. Our person has stopped playing guitar in the evening, not because they no longer love music, but because the thought of lifting the instrument carries a weight that it never carried before. Their partner sees withdrawal and feels rejected, which adds another layer of pressure, and the loop tightens again. What began as a protective burst of energy has become a chronic wasting, a system that conserves nothing, restoring no reserves, while sending constant signals of scarcity and threat. The scientific term for this high-cost biological state, allostatic overload, describes the tipping point where the body's regulatory systems begin to show measurable dysfunction. Now return to the car, engine off, the same morning light slanting through the windshield. Seen through the first lens, this person was weak, unable to cope, failing at the simple task of managing life. Through the lens of the biological story, something else becomes clear. The body is doing exactly what evolution taught it to do, in the face of a persistent threat that never retreats. The exhaustion, the irritation, the forgetfulness, the illnesses. They are not signs of broken character, but of a survival system that cannot locate an exit. Here, the reversal inside the whole episode begins to surface. The same chemistry that once allowed our ancestors to escape predators and survive famines has become, in a world of relentless psychological demands, a slow internal erosion. Stress is not an emotion you can simply decide to stop feeling. It is a physical language the body speaks when its needs for safety, control, rest, and connection are not being met. That language is not irrational. It carries an honest message about a mismatch between the environment you are navigating and the biological equipment you are navigating it with. The strongest insight arrives when you see that labeling the stress as the enemy is itself part of the problem. Trying to fight the stress response adds another layer of alarm because the body interprets the internal battle as further evidence that danger must be near. You cannot shout yourself out of a stress response any more than you can shout a fire alarm into silence. What the body needs is a different kind of signal, one that communicates, in a language older than words, that in this present moment the threat is not immediate. That signal begins with the breath, not as a quick trick, but as one of the few direct pathways through which you can voluntarily slow the sympathetic nervous system. A long, slow exhale activates the vagus nerve, which sends a calming message back to the heart and the brain, gently turning down the volume of the alarm. One deliberate breath does not erase a chronic stressor, but it begins to create a pause in which the body can register that it is not under attack right now. The true climax of this story is not a dramatic rescue, but a quiet reframing. The survival circuit becomes damaging only when it loses the off signal, and the off signal can be rebuilt, moment by moment, through cues of safety. That means the most practical psychological task is not to eliminate all pressure, but to restore the natural rhythms of activation and recovery that the stress system requires. Sleep, physical movement, warm social contact, predictable routines, and even moments of genuine laughter all send the biological message that the coast is temporarily clear. For our person, the turnaround does not begin with a grand resignation letter or a magical cure. It starts when they notice that a 10-minute walk at lunch, without checking any messages, leaves their shoulders slightly lower in the afternoon. And it solidifies when they stop interpreting their own fatigue as laziness and start reading it as a legitimate signal that the body needs restoration. But it shifts the focus from blaming yourself for the alarm to understanding what the alarm is honestly telling you and what kind of environment your biology can endure. The stress response is not a mistake. It is a brilliantly responsive system that only becomes destructive when the world never gives it permission to stand down. Back inside the car, the same morning light feels slightly different after this long look underneath the surface. The person still feels the tension in their chest, but now they recognize it as a biological event rather than a judgment on their worth. They step out of the car, not because the pressure has vanished, but because they are no longer adding self-blame to the weight they already carry. Understanding the difference between acute stress and chronic wear can change the questions you ask when you feel overwhelmed. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you might ask, "What recovery has my body been missing, and what small signal of safety can I offer it right now?" That question opens practical doors that self-criticism keeps locked. It might mean protecting the first hour after waking from screens and urgent demands to let the cortisol rhythm reestablish its natural shape. It might mean reintroducing micro breaks, not as laziness, but as deliberate cues that reset the nervous system before pressure builds to a breaking point. It might mean seeking out people with whom you can be honest without performing. Because social safety is one of the most potent signals the mammalian brain can receive. None of these adjustments guarantees that a stressful job or a caregiving burden will disappear. And honesty requires saying that sometimes the environment itself must change. But the evidence is clear that even within difficult circumstances, the total allostatic load can be lowered when recovery stops being treated as an afterthought. When you stop fighting your stress and start listening to the needs it signals, the loop can begin to loosen. You cannot erase the pressures of modern life, but you can stop mistaking a chronic alarm for a permanent personality. The person who closes the car door tomorrow morning will still face demands, but they will face them with a clearer understanding that the body's survival language is not a betrayal. It is the most honest message you will ever receive about the distance between the life you are living and the kind of life your physiology can sustain. And that message, once heard, can finally begin to change the story.